Well, here we are. You clicked on the thing. So I might as well get this out of the way now. I am going to be using my woodworking to actively thumb my nose at a ridiculous law that I am going to have to uphold this upcoming school year. So I'm going to be going down the deep, dark shithole that is Idaho state politics and I guess the greater culture wars that are pervasive in American society. Should be a lot of fun. So stick around. Here we go. I present before you today not just as an educator, but as someone who is thoroughly exhausted by the political theater currently masquerading as educational policy. Recently, teachers in the great state of Idaho, where I happen to teach, were handed a new directive courtesy of the passage of Senate Bill 1336. Among its various mandates, educators are now being explicitly encouraged to display a portrait of George Washington in our classrooms. Now, I am intentionally not going to give you all of the specific statutory language or the fine print of this provision. I'm not going to read you the individual clauses of said statute. If you want to know the exact mechanics of how Idaho's state legislature thinks a framed picture of our first president is going to improve reading comprehension or critical thinking, I invite you, nay, I urge you, to go look up Senate Bill 1336 for yourself. Read it. See how Idaho's elected officials choose to grossly misuse their time while in session. Now, this video isn't actually about George Washington, and it certainly isn't about education per se. What we are witnessing in Idaho and across classrooms all over the United States is a performative, hyper-partisan culture war driven by state legislatures. Politicians line up to feign patriotism, drape themselves in nationalism, and lecture educators on moral virtue, all while failing to embody a single one of those principles in their own governance. This is a classic monkey see, monkey do mentality. We saw it in Florida and Texas, where politicians realized they could score quick political points by turning public school classrooms into propaganda billboards. And now Idaho has dutifully plagiarized the script. The law in question in this video is utterly ridiculous. It is yet another mandate forced upon teachers that has zero bearing on the actual painstaking job of teaching human beings how to think, how to analyze, and how to learn. A portrait on a wall does not teach a child how to read a primary source, or evaluate evidence, or solve a complex equation. It is a symbolic posturing designed to satisfy a political base, handed down by lawmakers who treat public education as an ideological battleground rather than a public good vital to the preservation of a democracy. And the deepest irony of this entire spectacle is the profound, staggering ignorance that underpins these very pieces of legislation. These lawmakers demand that we instill patriotic virtue. Yet the broader public context surrounding these mandates reveals an American populace that barely understands its own fucking history. We heard endless self-congratulatory noise about America's 250th birthday. Everyone wanted to wave the flag for the semi-quincentennial, yet almost nobody seemed to understand how the United States actually came into being. People think history works like a light switch. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4, 1776, and poof, the United States of America was fully formed, operating on all cylinders, and finished. They completely ignore the long, arduous, messy stages of becoming the United States that occurred long after 1776. Consider the actual timeline here. It wasn't until June 21st of 1788 that New Hampshire became the crucial ninth state to officially ratify the United States Constitution, finally giving the document legal life. The very first federal elections didn't take place until months later, running between December 1778 and January of 1789. The United States Congress couldn't even count the electoral votes until it finally reached a quorum on April 6th, 1789. George Washington himself wasn't sworn in as president until April 30th of 1789. The last of the original 6 justices of the Supreme Court wasn't confirmed until February 10th of 1790. And while all of that was happening, Rhode Island didn't become the 13th state to ratify the Constitution until May 29th of 1790. Plus, Rhode Island didn't even seat its last delegate in Congress until December 17th of 1790. The nation was not fully constituted in 1776. The operational machinery of the constitutional republic we actually live under was not finalized until the very end of 1790. Which brings me to an inescapable, scathing realization. A huge portion of the United States does not know its own history, and apparently it can't do basic fucking math either. 2026 minus 1790 does not equal 250. If you celebrated the 250th anniversary of the governing Republic of the United States, you're off by about 2.5 decades. But why let historical facts or elementary arithmetic get in the way of a good photo op? Now, I recognize that to some, I might sound like I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. It's just a portrait, right? What's the harm in hanging a picture of George Washington? But the issue at hand is almost never what is directly written into the text of a law. The issue is the spirit behind the law. And the spirit of this legislation is one rooted in distrust, control, and political grandstanding. As long as the rational and reasonable members of our society continue to sit back and allow politicians, political action groups, and loudmouth parents who frankly probably couldn't pass a basic United States civics test if their lives depended on it, to continue to dictate what good, dedicated, well-intentioned teachers do in their classrooms day in and day out, we're going to be distracted by bullshit culture wars, and our kids will continue to fail. Our nation will continue to churn out generations of students who can't think critically, who can't question authority, and who mistake empty political symbols for actual civic virtue. So if these politicians insist that I display the face of George Washington in my classroom, fine. I will put his portrait up, but I will not let him serve as an empty prop for political theater. I will make sure that my students read his words. We will read what Washington wrote in his 1796 farewell address, where he delivered a chilling warning about the exact hyper-partisan rot that we are all witnessing today. Washington warned us that political parties are likely, and I quote, to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people. He warned that partisan zeal serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration, agitating the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms. Look at our state houses today and tell me Washington wasn't describing the exact politicians passing this slop that they call legislation. And while we're all staring at these portraits, I will ensure that my students hear what Washington believed the actual role of education was in a free republic. In his 8th annual message to Congress, he declared, a primary object should be the education of our youth in the science of government. In a republic, what species of knowledge can be equally important, and what duty more pressing on its legislature than to communicate it to those who are to be the future guardians of the liberties of the country? Notice what Washington said. He did not say the duty of the legislature was to force-feed patriotism or compel visual veneration or turn classrooms into culture war bloodbaths. He said the pressing duty of a legislature is to support the communication of real knowledge so that children can become the guardians of their own liberty. If lawmakers want George Washington in my classroom, they're going to get the real George Washington, not a sterile, sanitized mascot for their political posturing. Teachers don't need legislative decor guidelines. We don't need politicians using our walls to mark their partisan territory. We need the freedom, as the professionals that we are, to teach truth, no matter how inconvenient, to expose hypocrisy, no matter which side of the aisle is liable, and to cultivate minds so that they aren't weaponized by the very factions Washington warned us against. Well, we've reached the end of the video where I finally get to reveal what it is that I've done in order to check the box to abide by Idaho state law, and I've made these. I don't think there is a more iconic image of George Washington than a dollar bill, or maybe a quarter, or maybe the other thing that I'm going to display in my classroom. Get to that in a second. Now, if you think for a second that I was going to openly commit a federal crime by defacing legal tender on camera and then posting it to the internet, well, I guess that just only reinforces my belief that the powers of critical thinking are seriously lacking. So, I'm just going to have these in my classroom. If any of my colleagues feel they need to scratch that itch and check that box, then they can take one of these. They can just display it like so, or they can slap it up on a whiteboard. Should work just fine with the magnet. And I guess, if this isn't enough to satiate politicians' need to have a portrait of George Washington in their classroom, then I guess they could, hang something underneath this with another picture of George Washington. Killing two birds with one stone, I guess. So, yes, everybody, in this video, I have misdirected you, purposely misdirected you, and shown you what I wanted you to see so that you would jump to a conclusion that was not true. I used play money because I'm not dumb. And as far as the other thing that I'm going to display in my classroom, hang on a second. How about the flag of the great state of Washington? Well, there it is, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.